Hollow Knight Silksong was one of the most anticipated indie games of all time. The original Hollow Knight had quite the cult following, and when a sequel is announced 6 years before it is eventually released, it leaves a lot of time for an actual cult to form. I'm looking at you, r/Silksong. Those zealots would have you believe that it is the perfect game, that any criticism of Silksong is heresy. Well, I'm here to say that I am a heretic. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the game, I did. In fact, I was enjoying it so much that I decided to continue playing even after the credits rolled, because I suspected there was more to the game. And there was. A lot more. As an aside, if you are worried about spoilers, and consider what I just said to be a spoiler, there will be many more ahead. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, just go ahead and throw a like on this video right now to remind yourself to come back and watch it after you're done. All that said, my main criticism of this game has to do with its bosses. Some of the mechanics that make the bosses feel bad to me are present throughout the rest of the game, but they really become a problem during the boss encounters. Firstly, we have to talk about contact damage. Nearly every enemy in this game inflicts damage on the player if their toes touch the enemy's elbow or any other combination of body parts. It's patently absurd from a realism standpoint, but that's not really my complaint, as oftentimes games have to trade realism for gameplay. So then what is the gameplay purpose? It's there to provide a hazard, danger to the player, something that the player needs to avoid in the absence of the enemy actually attacking. Most modern games, especially 3D games, have for the most part left contact damage behind. The enemy has to actually attack you in order to inflict damage on you. They swing their sword, they bite with their enormous jaws, they shoot fireballs at you, and so on. But some 2D games have clung to this outdated contact damage mechanic because they feel like their enemies are too easy without it. And it's true. If you took the vast majority of enemies from Silksong and removed contact damage, they would feel pretty easy, probably too easy. But I'd argue that just reveals a lack of creativity in designing these enemies. If their most threatening and compelling feature is their physical presence on the screen, then what are they actually doing? But hey, when you're designing an enemy, it sure is a lot easier to just draw a circle on the screen that damages the player as it moves around erratically than it is to design an interesting moveset. Let's take a look at everyone's least favorite boss, Growl, or Growl, or whatever it is. If you fought this boss, or consumed any content at all about this game, you've probably seen people complaining about Growl. But let's take a look at the function his contact damage serves. If you can get underneath him or above him, it's very easy to score some hits with relative safety. His attacks fire laterally across the screen, so underneath or above him, you're totally safe. The only thing keeping this strategy from being a free win is the fact that he erratically bobbles up and down, dealing severe contact damage if you happen to be in his way. Here I try to get above him to bounce off of his head, but I end up eating 2 hits of contact damage for 2 damage each, so I lose over half my health bar. In this clip I'm going for a similar strategy, but I narrowly avoid the same fate because he doesn't quite bobble up all the way to the ceiling, so I get away with it. In this one I take kind of an unintuitive hit in that his diving animation just kind of happens to fly into me, even though he doesn't really appear to be attacking me. This up and down bobbling is not really a fun mechanic for me though. It lets you get under or over him, but you don't really get fair warning as to which way he's going to move, making the safest option being just to stay away from him. But if you're staying away from him, then how do you do damage? The result is that when he floats into you, it just feels like a dishonest and cheap way to take damage. But it's not just this sort of slow, meandering movement that causes contact damage. Some bosses move quite quickly, faster than the player can move, and it's not always predictable where they're going or when. Let's take a look at Crust King Khan. Yes, that's his actual name. Thankfully the crust starts with a C. He spends most of his time standing still, summoning these big spikes from the walls, but he occasionally jumps in a way that can be difficult to predict. Eventually you come to learn that there's a rhythm to this fight where he repositions a certain time after summoning a spike, but you still don't know which direction or how fast he's going to go, so you just have to stay away from him while he's moving. Another way the contact damage can feel unfair sometimes is if you just get boxed in by a bunch of enemies. In this case, these 3 guys just pin me in the corner and there's really nowhere for me to go. I think that contact damage, at least in 2D games, can still be fine in the right environment. The player just needs to stay away from the enemies, right? Or bounce off their heads like in Mario. But in this game, your primary method of doing damage is with a melee weapon, meaning you have to get up close. Just not too close, and it can be difficult to know exactly where the line is. The melee range on your weapon is pretty short, so you want to get in close to confirm a hit, but miscalculate the hidden hitbox by a pixel and you're down by a third of your health bar. Even more insulting is that you can still take contact damage while the boss is stunned. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have bumped into your lifeless body on the ground. I must have stubbed my toe. In addition, this game has really fast-paced movement. You have a dash that can close the distance with the boss in order to confirm a hit, but miscalculate the dash distance by a pixel and bam, you get hit again. Other frustrations come in with this downward pogo attack. This is a mechanic that the original Hollow Knight leaned on very heavily. If you attack downwards on top of an enemy, you deal damage and bounce back up, such that you can chain these together and bounce off the enemy repeatedly like riding a pogo stick. But in this game, the downward attack only goes down so far, after which you become a floating duck. If you started the attack slightly too high up, instead of scoring a hit and bouncing off the enemy, you just take damage and sadly flop to the ground. And then there are gems like these where you do get the hit, but the boss is just kind of moving upwards while you hit them, so you just get hit anyway. All that is to say that contact damage makes it very easy to take damage for reasons that don't really feel like your fault. Yes, I'm aware that there are strategies to overcome these challenges, and there are runners of this game capable of no-hitting it, but I'm talking about the average player's experience with the game. Get good is fine and all, but it has to come out to be an enjoyable experience. And I'd argue that contact damage, at least the way it fits into the context of this game, makes things more annoying than it does fun. And there is proof that it is possible to create a challenging and engaging boss in this game's format that doesn't have contact damage. There are a couple examples in Silksong itself. Coming to mind are the fourth chorus, which you encounter pretty early in the game, and Grandmother Silk, which you encounter later in the game. The fourth chorus is a good old-fashioned platforming boss, training you to use your newfound dash and float abilities as it swipes at you with its hands and rains fireballs down from the sky. Grandmother Silk is more in the center of the screen where the player can get to her more easily, and the player is free to jump through her hitbox and take swings at it. But this fight remains challenging and interesting because she sends real attacks your way. Attacks that are on the screen, and you can see them coming, and you can anticipate which direction they're going. Unlike the aimless, lumbering Grohl, taking up a quarter of the screen with his giant contact damage hitbox. There are these blades that come at you, sometimes vertically, sometimes horizontally. She swipes at you with her hand, requiring you to get behind the attack or jump over it. Later, there are rocks falling, there are spikes summoned from the ground, all these mechanics that are way more readable and feel much more fair when they hit you. The very existence of Grandmother Silk proves that this game's formula is capable of producing a challenging and interesting boss without the crutch of contact damage. I would have liked to see more bosses like this one and fewer like all the other ones. That said, even this boss is not without its problems, like this double silk strand attack that sometimes leaves you no place to go. Next, let's talk about runbacks. That's right, runbacks are back. You thought we left those behind in Dark Souls 2, but Silksong decided that traversing through this poison-filled hellscape was so fun you'd want to repeat it 15 times. I will say that I'm not opposed to the general idea of the runback. It can give you a moment to cool down from your last defeat and reconsider your strategy. But actually you don't have time for that in this game, because the runbacks are actually quite treacherous. And you need to arrive at the boss with full health, right? So you need to focus on the runback itself. A slight platforming mistake or even enemy movement RNG can tank your boss attempt before it even begins. We're currently looking at the Grohl runback, which contributes to his infamous reputation. It's far and away the worst one in the game. And this is with finding a secret bench that makes the runback shorter. That's right, there's a longer version of it as well for players who didn't find this secret. But wait, there's more! After the runback, there's a 6-part gauntlet before you even get to attempt the boss again. This is where it really went beyond the pale for me. By the time you're done with a technical platforming challenge of a runback, and an extensive series of combat encounters, all of which together took about 3 minutes each time, then and only then do you have permission to get another attempt at fighting Grohl. And he spent those 3 minutes really focused on the task at hand, deprived of any chance you might have had to think about the boss and how you might correct your approach this time. I found myself pausing the game right as he was spawning, while I attempted to remember what killed me last time, and what to try differently. The other lengthy runback that the player will likely end up repeating a bunch of times is this one for the Last Judge. Not as long or as dangerous as the one we just looked at, but it becomes tedious nonetheless. This one is also earlier in the game, before the player gets some movement abilities that would make it a lot easier. The most annoying part about this one for me was this bug right here, who sometimes floats into your path and can not only damage you, but also send you falling back down to the big guy, who will likely damage you again. That only happened to me once or twice, but it's frustrating nonetheless. There are also other more innocuous seeming runbacks too that just kind of confused me. For example, Scar Singer Carmelita is one of the bosses that doesn't send you back to a bench when you die, because you're fighting her in a dream or something. This seems like an obvious chance to have you be able to reattempt this boss immediately. But not so. It seems the devs just couldn't stop themselves from putting at least a little run back, so you have to loop up and around the boss room for no apparent reason other than that they wanted to waste your time. Oh, and by the way, there's a 4-part gauntlet on this runback too. Again, I'm not necessarily against the idea of a runback, in moderation, but it seems like this game really takes it to an extreme, where nearly every boss has some form of runback, and many include gauntlets of enemies that have to be beaten before you can even see the boss again. Taken in aggregate, it just feels excessive in Silksong. The next issue, and this is probably my biggest complaint, is that this game is obsessed with these teleporting, hyperactive bosses. I can't wrap my head around why this pattern is repeated across so many bosses in Silksong. They disappear just as you're getting in range to hit them, and then they reappear on the other side of the screen just long enough to launch an attack and then disappear again before you get there. It's so frustrating in a game that makes you work so hard for every hit, for you to swing your weapon while the boss is on the screen, only to have them disappear before the attack actually lands because they have other places to be. Or some are not actually teleporting, but they're moving fast enough that they practically are. And I can understand having 1 or 2 bosses like this in the game. You want some variety, so having 1 or 2 whose identity is being the fast bosses kind of makes sense to me. But it's not just 1 or 2. It's Lace, early in the game before you get too many movement options. Widow, you have a couple of tools to get to her. Sister Splinter, not as bad because her disappearing and reappearing is limited to the ceiling. And then there's Trobio, whose whole identity is teleporting and visual clutter. And then there's Gur the Outcast, Lace again, Pinstress, Raging Conchfly, Trobio the second time, but he's purple now, Shrine Guardian Seth, Carmelita, Lace a third time, and so on. All these bosses pose the same problem to the player. Can you get to me safely and quickly enough to score a hit or 2 before I vanish? And we repeat that again, about 50 times over the course of 4 minutes. By the end of the game, the player's been given a wealth of movement abilities, so this challenge is ultimately doable, but is it fun? Personally, I don't really enjoy constantly being on the hamster wheel, going as fast as I can but getting nowhere. In addition to just being exhausting, it can also damage the player's clarity and where the danger is coming from. Which side of the screen will they pop out on? Am I safe to grab a heal during this time that the boss is just gone? If you guess wrong, the boss might just appear on top of your head and deal contact damage to you before you even have a chance to react. If you find yourself fighting a particular boss for long enough, you'll learn when and where it's safe to heal, but it should be more intuitive. This issue reaches its peak in the final boss of the true ending, Lost Lace, who, by the way, you've already fought twice before this point, and you already know is one of the more hyperactive bosses in the game. But her teleportation obsession reaches new heights at the end here, as she becomes covered in black void goo as you fight her in the black void, so she blends in with the black void background. Look, she just disappeared. And now she's back, but her return animation was really obscured by the tentacle animation, so I couldn't really see where she was in real time. I understand that this is the final phase of the final boss of the final ending, so it needs to be cinema. But don't I also deserve a fair chance to see what's going on? To be clear, I'm not really suggesting that the difficulty is too high. I'm suggesting that the design of these bosses is founded on some mechanics which, when working together, made them not very fun for me, especially at the level of difficulty they're shooting for. The higher you make the difficulty, the more you're asking players to repeat boss fights, and the more those little annoyances start to turn into real frustration. In turn, this means that more difficult encounters have to be made to a higher standard, one worth playing many times. For instance, if you removed contact damage from a boss, you'd have to seriously redesign it to maintain its difficulty, which would mean designing a more threatening moveset for that boss. If you tone down the teleporting and speed of many of the bosses, perhaps you need to give the boss more defensive options to keep the player from just wailing on them. And if you remove the runbacks and the lengthy gauntlets to go with them, actually probably fine without it, come on. In trying to put my finger on exactly why these things are bothering me, I thought back to some comparable 2D games that I consider to be some of my favorites of all time: Shovel Knight, The Messenger, and Cuphead. Why do I remember these games with such nostalgic fondness, even though they share some of the same mechanics that frustrated me in Silksong? Aside from their incredible soundtracks, of course. Shovel Knight also has melee combat and contact damage, but the speed is way slower. It feels more intuitive when you're going to get bumped into, and you have more time to react to it. Your magic in Shovel Knight is also more readily available than Silk Skills and Silksong, giving you ranged attacking options more frequently. Additionally, the level of difficulty is way lower, so even if you do take some hits that felt unfair, it doesn't really matter since this game is not asking you to spend 40 minutes on one boss. The Messenger is in a similar boat: melee combat, contact damage, but slower speed, lower difficulty. Plus, the boss encounters tend to be a lot more dynamic than just try to hit the boss while they run away. And like Shovel Knight, it doesn't really do runbacks for bosses at least. Where Shovel Knight and the Messenger's bosses are way lower in difficulty, Cuphead is at a similar level to Silksong, I think. It does have the key difference of ranged weapons instead of the melee focus of the others. And as a result, taking contact damage is more often due to failing to avoid an obstacle than it is an attempt to attack the boss gone wrong. And of course, there aren't really levels to run back through in Cuphead. Retrying the boss is literally a button in the pause menu. So even though these games have some overlapping mechanics, they've avoided Silksong's issues by making some trade-offs between speed, ranged attacking options, level of difficulty, and the general approach of what they want players to be doing during boss encounters, where Silksong has you mostly chasing a moving target, especially the Messenger and Cuphead have you strategizing and platforming. That's not to say that those games are perfect, nor are they perfect comparisons to Silksong, but I think adding the context of other games that share similar mechanics helps highlight what feels off about Silksong for me. Anyway, despite all my complaining, as I said before, I did end up enjoying Silksong overall, which is precisely why these issues with the bosses stood out to me. It has interesting, diverse, distinct zones to explore, the characters are charming, the combat can be satisfying at times, and yet those positive moments are often interrupted by frustrating design choices. It got to the point where I started dreading finding the next boss, which is a shame because bosses are meant to be the highlight. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go read 400 comments that all say, "Get good." In the meantime, please enjoy this footage of a mushroom blasting off into space, which was in this game for some reason.